The White House, as you know, has long been regarded as the crown jewel of beats in journalism. It comes with a hard pass to history, occasional rides on Air Force One, but it also comes at a high cost. High pressure, endless travel, sleepless nights, bad food, time away from family are some of the benefits that are not included on the job postings, as you probably see. But Darlene Superville of the Associated Press, who's here with us today, is intimately familiar with the challenges, having covered the White House since the beginning of the Obama administration. That probably seems like decades ago now.
Seems like 40 years ago.
She has served as a supervisor on AP's national political desk, covered Congress, co-authored Jill, a biography of the First Lady. Darlene has done it all in DC. And she's here today to talk to you a little bit about how you attempt, and I emphasize attempt, to strike a work-life balance on a beat that never sleeps. So welcome, Darlene.
Thank you. When Kevin told me, or said in the email to me, that he was interested in me talking about how to maintain a work-life balance on this beat, I immediately shot back to him and told him that I was all in on the work-life imbalance, because it's kind of hard. There are reporters who manage to do it, and I don't know how they do it, I think, but I found it really difficult. And so one of the things that I rarely do or don't do is try to make after work plans, because I found that as soon as I make them, something happens. And case in point was Wednesday night. I usually work an early shift on Wednesdays, which starts at 7, and technically I'm off around 3:30, 4 o'clock. I had been traveling over the weekend with the president, and so I hadn't gotten to the grocery store since we'd come back on Monday night, and it's like, oh, Wednesday I'll get off early. I'll go home, go to the grocery, fill the fridge, do some laundry, blah, 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 blah. And then the White House schedules a 4 o'clock background call with the second gentleman, who is someone in my portfolio. My editor asked me if I was available to do it, and I was like, yeah, I guess I better do it because it's the second gentleman. And so there was that, and then I ended up with another story that I was juggling. Both were due at 5 in the morning. The second one required a lot more interviews. I was waiting for people to call back, that sort of thing. Long story short, I left the booth in the White House briefing room where I was at around 8, got home at 9, resumed working, and I was finished with both stories around 1 in the morning. So any plans that I had about like scrubbing my toilet or just quickly went out the window. But what I will say, and I say this a lot to young reporters, is that even though the beat is challenging and there is this kind of lack of balance and encroachment on your personal life, you do have to carve out blocks of time for yourself for things that are important to you. And one of the things that I do, or one of the things that I religiously or regularly block out time for, is exercise. Everyone needs it. We need a place to put our stress, to get it out of our system, and also to stay healthy, because on a beat like the White House beat, you may find yourself running at some point. Often they take the press pool up 3, 4, 5 flights of stairs, and you don't want to be huffing and puffing or be unable to make it up the stairs because you've got to be in the room where the president is. So one of the reasons I do work early shifts on Tuesday and Wednesday is so I can have Thursday and Friday mornings to do yoga and another gym class that I really like. So you can make those kinds of trade-offs in your schedule and block out, certain amounts of time that you really like. I mean, if you have a family and eating dinner with your family is important for you, you certainly can tell your editors, I'm unavailable from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., but after that, I'm all yours again, or something like that. And that's one of the ways that I think people like us can reclaim a little bit of balance in our lives, especially on a beat like this one, or even Capitol Hill. There's a lot going on in Capitol Hill these days. There's been a lot going on up there since, I think, Trump was in office, and the Capitol Hill press corps is also very stressed. So that would be one bit of advice for all of you.
You referred to people like us.
We're a special breed.
Can you describe a little bit? You talked a little bit about your schedule during the week, but what is and you mentioned as we were talking coming up what yesterday was like. Can you talk about the unpredictability of the work and how you manage that?
Wow, that's a good question. You just manage it. You just have to deal with it. So yesterday started, so that was the morning after I'd worked all those hours until 1 a.m. So I was supposed to be in like around 10 o'clock. And I said, you know what, I worked all those hours yesterday. I'm just going to go in a little bit later today. What I was doing yesterday, so I'll back up for a minute. AP has 8 people covering the White House. We're not all there every day because of space limitations, but there were 4 other of my colleagues were going to be in the booth, which is the AP has a little booth in the White House briefing room, and that's where we hang out when we're there. So knowing that there were 4 other people there yesterday, I didn't feel that I needed to be there exactly at 10 or 10:30. When the White House sets the pool call time, which means that's when all the reporters should be on campus, just in case. And stop me if you all know all of this, but that's the time that reporters need to be on campus in case something were to happen. So I went in a little bit later. Yesterday, the only thing on his schedule was a trip to Leesburg, Virginia, where he was going to talk to the House Democratic Caucus. They're out there for a couple days having their retreat. So there's an in-town pool, which is a group of reporters that will go into rooms at the White House where the president is if he's doing something in the White House or if he's going somewhere in DC. Then there's the out-of-town pool, which I was part of yesterday because he was going to Leesburg, Virginia. We had to be at the White House around 1:45 because they were driving us there in advance because he's on the helicopter, and there are no helicopters for us yesterday. So that was my assignment. There was a briefing. Some of my other colleagues, another one of my colleagues was doing the briefing. And then we started getting rumblings that the special counsel report was going to drop. And that apparently dropped while he was either at the conference or on the way to Leesburg, Virginia to talk to House Democrats. So I wasn't really involved with that because I was in the out-of-town pool going to Leesburg, Virginia. But you still have to be aware what's happening because if there's an opportunity when he's there to ask him a question, that's the obvious question yesterday. And then he did his speech. He talked about the special counsel report a little bit in his remarks, and he left. We had no opportunities to question him there. He went back to the White House. And there were rumblings that he might make an appearance, he might make a statement, there might be something on camera. And this was a holdover from a couple days earlier when he came out to talk about something. I think it was the border bill being flushed down the toilet. A lot of toilet references, I'm sorry. The border bill being defeated. And of course, we all want to ask him questions, and he very specifically said on Tuesday, I'll come back here on Thursday and answer all of your questions. And so we were all, okay, what does this mean? When is he going to do it? Da, 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 da. And so they decided to put him out last night. I was at a meeting. The White House Correspondents Association had scheduled its annual meeting last night. So I was at that when this was going on. But again, on a beat like this, what I did when I got home was I, went to C-SPAN and watched the video and listened to what he said, because you can't come to work on a morning after the president makes a statement like that and not know what he said. So that was yesterday.
Yesterday sounds like 3 days.
And most days are kind of like that. I mean, sometimes you come in the morning and you think, okay, there's nothing on the schedule. We just have a briefing today. I'm going to get this, and this done, and then something comes out of left field, and you're diverted from what your carefully thought out daily plan was.
Well, let me open it up to your questions. And fire away on whatever you're interested in knowing. As we've said before, Darlene has not only covered the White House, but Congress, and is one of the best in the business. So fire away.
Hi, Darlene.
Hello.
Whoa, hot mic. So I had a question I thought might benefit the whole group in a sense of when you're maybe a little greener or, just a few years in of doing this, how do you recommend asking for the things that you need for your time to have that balance when it could feel almost like, you need to say yes, 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 yes to everything. Or if you're not a part of doing something at that moment, the sky is going to fall down, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that pressure when you're like fresh out the gate.
Mm-hmm.
And how would you recommend approaching that sort of conversation?
That's a great question. And I think what's different now between when I started in journalism 100 years ago is that there is more, newsroom managers are more aware now of the need for people to take care of themselves, right? The focus on people's mental health and just work-life balance, even though this particular beat may not allow for a lot of balance in our lives, I think managers are more aware that those kinds of things are important. Parental leave when colleagues have children, to spend time with their kids, having time with your children if you have a child, to put them to bed or take them to school, that sort of thing. And I see now where managers in the AP are a lot more lenient in terms of, it's no longer so hard and fast that you have to be at your desk at 9:30 or you have to be at your desk at 10:30. If you need to take your child to school or whatever, you can come in at 10 versus 9. And there's just more awareness around all of that. So I think now, as a green reporter, you would be well within your right to ask for some of those things. And I think you would find management to be a little more receptive nowadays versus 20 years ago or so.
Just to follow up on that, what about the internal pressure we put on ourselves to be there, cover the story? Because a lot of people sort of work their whole careers to get to Washington, and you are here, so you want to make the most of it.
Yeah, you don't want to screw it up kind of thing. And that is hard. The internal pressure is hard. I go through it too, I think. Just trying to catch up on everything the president says, reading all the transcripts, watching all the videos of his remarks, just always wanting to know what he's up to. Even when I'm on vacation, I'm still scrolling through the Slack channel trying to keep up with the conversations that my colleagues are having throughout the days when I'm gone, just so that I have some awareness of what's happening or what he said or what he did. But having said all that, I think you can step back from it a little bit and not, put all that pressure on yourself because, you can catch up. It's okay to miss something. It was okay for me last night, for example, to stay at that meeting and not rush back to the White House. I offered to go back once we learned that he was going to come out and do what he did. But the colleague of mine who was still there was pretty confident that she could manage it. And basically, nowadays, it's easier with all of the live streaming because she was there and she was in the pool and went into the room. And all the other colleagues that helped her, they were at home, and watching on the live stream and doing it that way. So the pressure is real, but I think you don't always have to, you can dial it back every now and then and still be okay.
Hello.
Hi.
My question is, like you mentioned that, as you're going through your day-to-day, carving out time is a way that you kind of balance everything. But I guess when, you feel yourself kind of almost reaching a breaking point or, kind of reaching burnout more than, you normally would, what advice you have for that and kind of, giving yourself a refresh and staying on track in a, I guess, stable place, you know.
One thing I discovered recently, and this may come as a surprise to all of you, is, you know, turning off notifications on your phone. I've started to do that on weekends or just times when I really want to take a break from it. And as I was saying in the answer to your question, you can step back from it every now and then. You don't always have to be in the middle of everything that's going on. And then you come back and you try to catch up as best as you can. You know, like with notifications, right? If you're sitting and you're having a meal or doing something, I find every time something pops up, you know, I'm looking at the phone, and you can't really concentrate on what else that you're doing. So that's one way, you know, to kind of pull back and not go over the edge. Exercise is another great way. I mean, I like to cook, and I find that when I'm cooking or I'm in the kitchen, you know, if you're slicing and dicing stuff, you have to pay attention to what you're doing or you may lose a finger. So just finding things to do that are not tied to politics or even to journalism. Friends who are not journalists, I find also are a great outlet sometimes because they're not all that interested in what you do or what the president said. There's an older woman who lives in my building, and she's become a good friend of mine. And she always wants to go to lunch with me. Like, we can go to lunch today, and then she sees me tomorrow. It's like, oh, if you have some free time, let's go to lunch. But the thing that I don't like when I go to lunch with her, she always wants to talk about politics. And I don't want to talk about it. So I think, you know, if you find friends that are just like not interested, I don't want to say not informed, but you can be informed and just not want to talk about it all the time. Those are other ways too to help, you know, pull you back in and, you know, have you kind of look at the bigger picture and see what's important. Like a lot of people in Washington, we think Washington is the center of the universe, right? And people outside of Washington, not so much. So I hope that helps.
I don't know the best way to phrase this, but I guess in my limited experience working with people late at night or like a very long day, I feel like people start to get kind of like cranky, like still professional and nice, but people, especially when they're waiting for someone to get back to them or you're relying on someone else to finish your night, it can like take a toll emotionally. I just am wondering like if you have any advice or do's and don'ts for like when you're in that 1 a.m. trying to be genteel to those around you, but also get what you need and get out of there, how to sort of...
What would be an example?
Oh, I guess like you said the other night, you were waiting for people to call you back for that story. I guess like how do you keep yourself like pumped up to wait for them, and how do you convey that sense of urgency? And I guess also like I've never, in the way the media portrays like being on Air Force One and being sort of like in before the lid is called or whatever, are people, I guess people like tensions might sort of, you're running around a lot. I don't know the best way to articulate it, but just from like a managing interpersonal skills and sort of from your sources and your colleagues, do you have any tips for like in the really dark times, how to sort of get what you need and protect your own peace?
Well, so in an example like the other night when I was waiting for those calls, I think one thing you want to keep in mind is that you are a professional. And even though, let's say someone tells you they're going to call at 5 and then it ends up being 7 before they actually call you, that may frustrate you. I'm sure it will, or it would, but you don't want to have your voice sort of telegraph the frustrations, right? So you still want to be professional and, you know, thank them for getting back to you and ask your questions as you would if they had called you at 5. And I'm just trying to think of what else. And that's, you know, that's kind of what I do. I mean, I try to remember that I work for the AP. You know, you'll keep in mind that you're working for NPR, and you don't want to do anything to, you know, make the person that you're talking to feel negatively about NPR because you may be frustrated and you kind of let it show.
Totally. I just wanted to clarify, like, what are you doing between 5 and 7 while you're waiting?
While I'm waiting for the callbacks? Yeah. Oh, well, in a case like that, I had some interviews and then I was still waiting for some other ones. And so you can be writing the story, you know, trying to get it together. working on putting your background together. And I was juggling 2 stories, so I was trying to kind of work on both of them at the same time. So it wasn't as though I didn't have anything to do and I was just waiting for this one, person to call back. And there's always stuff to do. I'm sure if your email inbox is anything like mine, you've got hundreds of unread email, or you can delete, that can be a little project while you're waiting. Timesheets, expenses, there's just always stuff to do in moments like that.
Right here.
Hi.
Hey, we've been talking about, finding ways to strike some sort of balance and getting time away. One of the things that's unique about a White House or Congress beat is that even if you are quote unquote off, there can be things that happen that rise to a level where you gotta drop everything and deal with it. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering how you find time to relax and actually let yourself relax when you know that that call could come. And you want to have a glass of wine, but maybe they are going to call the presser and the president's going to come out and take a bunch of questions or whatever. How do you let yourself sort of relax, but keep one foot in the door knowing that they might call you back in?
I'm not much of a wine drinker. And 2, I feel like I never relax. The pace may slow a little bit, right? So you may be going at 5 miles an hour pace, and then you'll slow down to a 10 mile an hour pace, but you're still kind of going, at least for me. I gave you the example a little earlier about even when I'm on vacation, sometimes I'm still scrolling through the Slack channel and keeping up with the conversation back in DC. I also find that on vacation, I am still going through email and keeping up that way. One, because there is just so much email that comes in. If you're gone for a week and you don't look at email and then you come back, you're deep buried in email, and there's just no time to dig out on your first day back at work. So my philosophy and what I like to do is just take a little time every day when I'm away and just, delete. Okay, I'll read this one, maybe flag it to respond later, that kind of thing. My mom lives in Florida. I go to visit her 3-4 times a year. And that's, it's nice. It's not always relaxing because you are with your parents. I love my folks dearly. And I often joke that when I go to see them, it's a working vacation. But it gets you, or at least gets me out of Washington, gets me a little bit away from, running around and being in pools and that sort of thing, even if I'm still looking at the Slack channel and weeding out email and things like that. But you're right, there are situations where, you will be away, or you'll be at a movie or dinner with friends and something will happen and you'll have to tell your friends, sorry, I've got to go, or you have to cancel on them before you can even meet them. It comes with the territory, and I think as long as you are mindful that you may be having to make those sacrifices, then you'll be okay. And then you can make it up to them at another time.
My name's Alex.
Hi, Alex.
How do you approach expressing opinions or thoughts and regulating, not trying to, show biases in, the small town of DC in your personal versus work life?
You just don't do it. The company that I work for, AP, we have a reputation of being just the facts, straight down the middle, no opinion left, right, or any other angle that exists. And I think the training that I had, again, when I started with AP, my whole career has been at AP. And so when I started 100 years ago, that's the training that I got, and that's the training that has stuck with me, even though we are in a new environment now where I think a lot of journalists are feeling more free about being opinionated. That's just not something I've ever subscribed to, and I don't think, at least for me anyway, it's not where I want to be. So I say don't do it. Even on Twitter, I think you'll see a lot more journalists now tweeting opinion things, and I just think you don't ever want to give too much of yourself away, too much of your personal thoughts away, because you don't want to give readers or politicians or the people you cover ammunition to say, look, that's why he wrote that story, or that's why she said that, or something to that effect.
What about with like those, like friends from home or people like that are outside the DC bubble? Like, do you ever kind of, because sometimes it can be exhausting to hold thoughts back, I find occasionally.
I think you have to make judgments about who your friends are and who you may be sharing those opinions with. And, figure out whether what you say is going to stay in the circle, like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of thing. Are they going to keep your confidence, or is it something that may eventually go beyond that circle? But I don't do any opinion at all.
I find often the thing that reinvigorates me about this job is doing enterprise or feature type reporting. Mm-hmm. But when you're in a beat that is so much hard news and so much time in person, how do you carve out time to do those longer but sometimes more rewarding stories?
Yeah, you have to work around the breaking news. And again, if on a beat like the White House, if you get the president's schedule and there's just a briefing on it, and theoretically you have the whole day to work. You have the whole day is blank. You can chip away at it this day. If you're on Air Force One flying to California, that's 5 hours in the air, you can chip away on it there. You just have to kind of stitch it together little by little, which is what I find myself doing a lot. Because it's become harder and harder, I think, just because there is so much news going on all the time, to actually maybe take a day or a day and a half and just focus on one story. You're pulled in so many different directions because there's so much happening.
I had two questions. The first one, how do you manage competition with your colleagues, especially within the AP itself? And the second one is, does the glamour sort of wear off at a certain point after doing this for a while?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned earlier, AP has 8 people at the White House who are assigned to cover the White House. And we try to operate as a team, so we're not really, going after each other or keeping information from each other. If one of our colleagues, for example, goes out and has a lunch with a senior administration official that is off the record, or if they're traveling on the plane and somebody comes back on the plane to talk to the press, we all type up notes and we share it with the other people on our team, because we kind of all need to know what those officials are thinking and saying, and it helps all of us. I know it doesn't always work that way with some other teams, but that's what we do at AP. And then in terms of competing with non-AP colleagues at the White House, yeah, it is a competitive beat. Obviously, it's I think Kelly O'Donnell, who is the president of the White House Press Corps, described it as the pinnacle of reporting, and it's you all know it's one of the premier beats in this city, and so we are all scrapping around for that next development on a story, or who's going to be appointed to this, or when's the president going to do that. But there are times also when we act together as a group for the collective interest of all of us. So it works a little bit both ways in terms of the bigger group. And Akela, you can agree or disagree with that we do work as a group sometimes, and then other times, obviously, we're all trying to, one-up each other on whatever the story of the day is. To your question about the glamour, has the glamour of the beat worn off? I know a lot of people look at it as a glamour beat, and there is that aspect to it of flying on Air Force One and being in the bubble and all that. I don't think I've ever really looked at it as a glamour beat. It's certainly a privilege to be doing it, because when I got out of college and journalism school, never in a million years did I think I would end up at the White House. And it's a big responsibility also, because when you travel with the president, when you're in the room with the president, at least for what we do at AP, your eyes are on him all the time. You have to be watching, you have to be alert, because anything can happen, right? He can slip, he can fall, he can say something that'll make major news, and you have to be ready to listen. You have to be ready to try to ask a question if there's an opportunity. He's close enough to us to ask that question. So it's a lot of pressure. I mean, it's glamorous. It's pressure, it's a privilege, it's all the things. That helps.
Right here.
Hi.
Hi.
It's sort of to the pressure question. I find that on weeks like this, where you're working all the time and really exhausted, I tend to second guess myself kind of late at night more than I would if it's like 10 a.m. on a Monday morning. And I feel like that both the internal kind of second guessing and then also sort of externally, like when you get those nasty emails from readers or those things sort of tend to weigh on me more when I'm really like tired. So I guess how do you keep up your, I guess, like confidence and, you know, trust your judgment and yourself when your brain is kind of foggy?
One thing that I do is I try not to pay too much attention to what, you know, readers and all those kind of snide or nasty comments that just come out of nowhere. Being a journalist is not easy, and I think a lot of people who say those things unsolicited don't realize just how hard we work and how much goes into, you know, writing a story or covering the president or covering Mitch McConnell or Mike Johnson and things like that. And sometimes, you know, I will bounce things off of colleagues. So if you are second guessing yourself, if you have a colleague that you trust, you know, you can, hey, you know, this happened and I'm wondering if I should have done it this way or that way. You know, what do you think? Do you have a mentor type person in your bureau or newsroom who could be a sounding board for you in those moments of self-doubt? That would be something that I would recommend or suggest. I do it too. We all do it, you know, in our little group in the White House. And you can do it late at night now because, you know, Slack is right here. You can always ping your colleague or call them and get them to weigh in on what you're feeling.
Hi.
Hi.
Could you talk, thanks for being here.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Could you talk a little bit about the First Lady beat and how that fits or how that differs from covering other principles, as it were? And I don't know, I'm curious if there's a balance to strike between somebody who is not elected, but is also kind of a political figure in a lot of ways.
Interesting question. So I think first ladies more and more are becoming, I want to say, integral to administrations, right? You know, there was a time when first ladies were looked at as, you know, being the mother, raising the kids, supporting the president, you know, being that kind of sounding board that you were just talking about needing. But more and more lately, they are becoming, and I want to say political figures in their own right. Obviously, they're not elected, but they're certainly, they do a lot for the administrations. Jill Biden is certainly doing a lot for this administration. Michelle Obama did. And so they merit news coverage just because of all the things that they do. I'm just trying to think here. So it's important to cover them. Just because, and the other thing, one of the other things about first ladies too, you know, yes, presidents have their chiefs of staff, their counselor people, you know, those types of advisors, but the first lady is the one who sees the president first thing in the morning, and she's the one who will see him before they go to sleep at night. So they do have kind of a level of influence that some other advisors may not have. First ladies aren't doing all of the heavy stuff, right? That's the president. So they're not weighing in on Israel and Hamas and Ukraine and issues like that. She may privately, but not in a public-facing kind of way. This first lady is beginning to do a lot more political travel. Just because he's running for re-election. And so that alone, you know, kind of speaks to, I think, the just like growing power of first ladies. You know, they're out fundraising, they're out doing things, interviews, defending their husbands, that type of stuff. And so while I know that some people try to look at the First Lady as being, and when I say First Lady, I don't mean this First Lady, I'm just First Lady in general. What they look at First Ladies as kind of being above politics because they do these issues about children. You know, Michelle Obama had Let's Move. Melania Trump had Be Best. Jill Biden is into education. So they're, on one level, they are into the softer velvet glove type issues. But on another level, they are very influential, often very political. And so you do have to kind of reflect that, both of those sides in the coverage, if that makes sense.
Back here.
Hi, thank you for being here.
Hi.
I was just curious to know, is the White House beat something you had always wanted to do in your career? And if you can talk about, how you got there. And also, I guess, the White House beat seems to be a very small circle. I'm curious also to hear, nowadays, how do you get to be a White House reporter? Like, what's the path?
Sure.
Because it's 3 questions.
To answer your first question, the answer is no. When I got out of college, and I'm sure this might have been the case with all of you when you got out of college, you're just thinking about how are you going to get a job? Who's going to hire me? That kind of thing. I wasn't thinking White House. I grew up in New York City. I went to NYU and studied journalism there. And I went to a job fair, I think it was senior year, stumbled on the AP table. They had an internship that was for minorities, to bring more minorities and people of color into the AP. It might have been a week or 2 before the deadline. The gentleman encouraged me to apply. I did. I walked away thinking, they're never going to call me. A couple weeks later, I think I got home from class. My mom says, oh, there's a message for you. Some guy named Jack from the AP called. And I'm like, what? And they chose me for the internship. So that's how I got my foot in the door at AP. It was an internship. And I'm sure you all know the value of internships. And it was a 13-week internship. I was placed in New Jersey, so I wasn't all that far from home. Did a bunch of different things, worked with the sports writer 1 week, the photographer another week, the broadcast editor. So just got a feel for all the different parts of journalism at AP. 13 weeks turned into a 9-month probationary position. And one of the good things about being placed in New Jersey is the fact that it's so close to New York and all the media company headquarters that almost any news that came out of New Jersey was like big national news. And so 9 months, 13 weeks turned into 9-month probation. And shortly before that was up, I was offered a full-time position. So that's how I got into AP, and I've been there ever since. I did 6 years of reporting in New Jersey, about 2.5 just being a general assignment reporter. I covered several Miss America pageants when those were a thing, and they were done in Atlantic City. It was a nice little trip down to Atlantic City. I learned a lot about bugle beads and sequins and tiaras and all that stuff that's coming in handy now, right? Then I eventually transferred to the State House in Trenton, and that's where I started doing political coverage, covering the governor, the legislature. And there was a big gubernatorial race back then, which may be before some of your time, between Jim Florio and Christy Whitman. Covered that race. And also back in the day, lots of news organizations used to have reporters based in Washington, regional reporters that were here kind of covering the congressional delegation and issues that were being debated or legislated in Washington that affected a particular state. So New Jersey had a regional reporter in DC. She was moving on and transferring to LA to become a science writer. So that opened up a slot in Washington. I applied for it, but didn't get it. Then I went on vacation. And in those days, I relaxed. I went to the Caribbean to visit my grandmother. And then when I got back, the woman who was the bureau chief in DC called me up and said, how would you like to come and join the national staff? And she must have been going through resumes of all the people who were not chosen for the regional job. And that's how I ended up coming to Washington. Was there a third part to your question?
Yeah, just what's the path?
What's the path now? I think the path now is a lot shorter than my path. So I'll give you some dates here. I started at AP in 1988. I came to DC in 94. So I've now been in town for about 30 years. It took me, I was a journalist in journalism for 20 years before I ended up at the White House. Today, I don't think it takes 20 years. I think a lot of people are coming out of college and are ending up at the White House at much younger ages than I did when I got onto the beat. So I say all that to say that the path is shorter now. If you want to be a White House reporter today, you probably can find a news organization that would be willing to take a chance on you and make you their White House correspondent. I know the Messenger just folded, unfortunately, and BuzzFeed is no longer around, but those were some ways that a lot of younger reporters got their foot in the door, because it allowed them, one, to start out in journalism, and two, those organizations wanted somebody at the White House, and these people wanted a job. Put the two and two together, and there you have it. So I think it's a lot easier now.
Hi.
Hi.
Diego here.
Hi.
I have two questions. The first, how do you think the press access has been in this White House and how it compares to others? And the second, about news judgment in the White House beat, especially when the president speaks. We know this president sometimes makes quote unquote gaffes. How do you decide whether that is something relevant or not? Like when he messes up the name of the French president or the German chancellor, when you think something is actually relevant in a serious, a newsy mistake, I guess, and when it isn't.
Yeah, that's a great question, and a very timely one given all the stuff that's happened this week. So when he messed up Mitterrand and Macron, I could kind of see how that might happen, right? Both last names start with M. And obviously he knew Mitterrand and he knows Macron. And so, when something happens once, you're kind of like, okay. But then he did it again, and then he did it twice in the same night. And we, meaning our editor and some of my colleagues at the AP who cover the White House, had been kicking around, well, okay, like when do we write about this? Like, when has he done this enough that it actually forces us to write about it, right? Because you're in an environment now where you have a president who's 81, poll after poll after poll shows that people are concerned about his age and whether he should run again. The gaffe thing is not new with Joe Biden, right? I mean, he's kind of done this all his career, so you also have to keep that in mind too. But I think just the environment that we're in makes it more of a story. And I think that we may be doing something, not me, but some other colleagues may be working on a story like that for the weekend. Also jumping off of all of the descriptions that were in the special counsel report about him, just not having a good memory, not remembering this, not remembering that. Sometimes I can't remember what I had for lunch 2 days ago. So, it's hard. It's hard. But just given the environment that we're in, like I said, and the stuff that's happening and all the stuff in the special counsel report, so that kind of makes it a story, right? Here's somebody who wants to be president again. He's asking the American people to trust him again for another 4 years when they're seeing all of this stuff go on, and it's legitimate. The White House obviously doesn't like it, but they don't get to dictate what we write about. Your question about press access, the access in this White House, I would say, is 50-50. They are resisting, for whatever reason, putting him out to do kind of a formal press conference. And sometimes I think that if they had done that yesterday, we would not have seen what we saw last night, right? There would not have been this crush of people, reporters, just shouting And when I listened to the replay of that a couple times, there was a point where you can't even hear the questions because there's just so much shouting. If they had put him out in a more formal press conference, it would have been a little more organized. He could hear the question, we could hear the question. He might not have gotten so angry. And I think there also might have been a broader range of questioning if it was a more formal news conference. Whenever we talk about when is he going to have a press conference, will he come to the briefing room, when is he going to take our questions, they often will hold up the fact that he talks to us on the way to the helicopter or on the way back from the helicopter, or sometimes after he makes a statement on X, Y, or Z, he'll take a few questions. But it's not the same as a formal news conference where you've got time to ask a question and not try to ask these like soundbite questions. One of the things we do sometimes, instead of trying to get out a full question, is we'll just say, Netanyahu and Gaza, or the economy, the little buzzword that will get him to stop, because there's not enough time to, fully unfurl a comprehensive question. And there is someone at the White House, her name is Martha Kumar. She is it Bowie State? Bowie? She's at one of the universities in Maryland. She's been at the White House for a long time, and she keeps very good records on all of this stuff. And she dropped a report last week, and Biden has fallen behind, I think it was Obama. Is it Obama? He's certainly well behind Trump in terms of media availabilities. I mean, Trump, all you had to do was turn on that light and Trump, and he talked all the time, in the Oval Office, in the Roosevelt Room, going to the helicopter, coming from the helicopter. There are lots of times when Biden will take a question or two, and there are lots of times when he acts like we're gum on the sole of his shoe. So it could be better, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And as journalists, we're always going to want more. We're always going to want to, ask him questions every time we see him. And their instinct is always going to be, keep him away, don't let him talk, that kind of thing. So it's this constant push and pull between the press and the White House over access. Hi.
Speaking about access, something we see a lot in Congress is spokespeople, comms directors for certain lawmakers will, give out exclusives or scoops or leak certain things to certain reporters. Curious whether you see that covering the White House at all, or whether it's kind of a more open, accessible operation.
No, it happens at the White House too. There are leaks and favored organizations and scoops and things like that. I think it's just across the media landscape that kind of thing goes on. Yeah.
How do you navigate the changing in administrations? I'd imagine some of your sources kind of walk out the door. You have to build up new ones. How do you navigate that process every 4 or 8 years to get yourself on top of the beat and out in front of other, organizations of reporters?
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly, one thing you do, and if you continue to be a reporter in this town, let's say you covered a Democratic administration and the next one that comes in is a Republican. You want to stay in touch with those Democratic people because a lot of those people get recycled, for lack of a better word. A lot of the folks who worked with or worked for President Obama and in the Obama administration, a lot of them are now working for President Biden. Because they were the last people to work in a Democratic White House. They know how it works. They might have known President Biden, that sort of thing. So you always want to keep in touch with sources you have, regardless of who they worked for. The other thing is, when a new administration comes in, you have to, you do have to start all over again. You have to start with the introductions. And a lot of times, and we figured this out or realized this when the Trump administration came in. A lot of times before an administration comes in, they already know who the reporters are on the White House beat, and they do their own research and backgrounding and, building dossiers, for lack of a better word, on who you are, how you report, the kinds of things you report. They'll figure out if you're opinionated or not, and draw conclusions as to whether they think you're down the middle, a good person to work with, slanted one way or the other. So they know you. They already know you when they're coming in, and we learned some of that when the Trump folks came in. But you do have to start all over again, making new introductions, getting to know people, inviting people out to coffee as much as you can get them to go out to coffee with you. It's often hard with White House folks because they are busy too. Travel is another good way to get to meet people sometimes on a new beat, because you're all on the plane or you're all in the bus together or you're all kind of huddled on the tarmac waiting for the president to get off the plane. You can sidle up to somebody and have a couple of minutes of chit chat, introduce yourself, that sort of thing, invite them out for coffee or whatnot. That's it.
I had a question and follow up to Diego's question about, I guess the Biden gaffes and finding those newsworthy and stuff. I think another aspect to that is, when you are reporting on those, for example, Biden gaffes, I guess I'm curious about how you write it without bias, because I think some publications may make the connection or pose the question, does this mean he's fit for the presidency or those kinds of things? And I guess, I'm wondering if you would go there in your reporting, is that fair, or how do you navigate those kinds of, I guess, fuzzy situations where, it could be easy to kind of...
You mean, would we say that flat out that he's unfit or something like that?
I know you wouldn't say that, but I guess how do you? Obviously that question is there in the article just from the facts, and so I guess how would you navigate just that and playing around with that idea, or just completely ignore it? I guess.
Well, no, I don't think you can ignore it because, like we said earlier, it is an issue just given the environment that we're in. It's an election year. Polls show that this is an issue of concern for people, and the gaffes keep happening. I think one thing that would help or helps on a story like that is just reporting, right? Talking to, doctors, neurologists, maybe people who have known the president for a long time, who might not be willing to say anything negative on the record, but maybe they'll speak on background or some sort of basis where a name isn't attached to it, but they can sort of talk about what they've seen from him over the years. It will be a delicate story to write. And there are some news organizations that, will go there and just say, don't reelect this man. But that's not our role. I think our role is to kind of talk to as many expert people as we can and, lay out their thoughts, lay out their conclusions, and allow the readers to decide if that helps.
Hi, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Can you talk a little bit about a time where you might have made like a major mistake in a story, or you reported something that was completely inaccurate, and how you recovered from that? Just any challenges that you've encountered sort of early on in your career, and how you've been able to navigate, through like a major screw up that you might have made.
I'm trying to think of a major screw up. But there are some because, we are all imperfect people. There were a couple of stories maybe late last year, where there were little things that were wrong. Like I remember the night they light the national Christmas tree, the president goes down there and the first lady goes down. And so the vice president and her husband were supposed to go. And we get down to the mall, and it's very dark and everything, of course, because they have to light the tree, and there's the audience and everything, and you don't see everyone. And I did report that the vice president and her husband went, And then I think it was the next morning, her office reached out and said that she wasn't there. And I can't remember where she went. She went somewhere. Something happened and she had to go. But there was no additional update to her schedule to like alert us that what they had said previously about her whereabouts had changed. And so in that case, since it was the next day, the way the wire service works, I couldn't just go into that story and make the change. I had to do something that's called a corrective, which is not something you really want to have happen at the AP. But you have to fess up to it because it was wrong, and you don't want that incorrect detail in your story to live on forever, because it will live on forever. So I had to do that, and you have to tell your editor, and it's like, oh, I did that. But you do it, you fess up to it, you own up to it, and then you move on, because the next day is going to come. There are new challenges, new things to report about, new things to write about, and you just have to then like redouble and make sure that you're just checking everything again and not making any errors. But it happens, and we're all imperfect.
Just thinking about, you said you've been in Washington for almost 30 years and how coverage, and particularly of the president, has changed in that time. The ability for the president and the White House to take their message directly to Americans is a lot greater now than it was. They don't have to do an interview with the AP if they want to. He can talk directly to camera. This White House live streams everything, brings in influencers to do their messaging. So how do you navigate sort of, trying to be a medium through which the White House can communicate to the American people when it appears like they are much more likely to just try to do so directly and circumvent the press altogether?
Yeah, that's a good question. The White House still needs the press, even though they are, going out more to influencers and talking directly with the people, or putting things out on Twitter, social media, all those things that you say. We're in the room when he does stuff, so we can provide context that they wouldn't necessarily get from him just speaking to live stream. And for example, yesterday in the statement that he did on the special counsel report, so first there was a paper statement, and then he made a statement at the House Democratic caucus, which was basically reading aloud what he had put out on paper. And last night as well was also a reiteration of that same statement, more or less. The statement focused a lot on the fact that the special counsel concluded that no charges were warranted. He didn't throw up any roadblocks. He didn't try to impede the investigation, that sort of thing. But all the stuff that he didn't talk about is, the memory things, right? So that's where we come in, because even though the president may be speaking directly to people through these other mediums, they are only presenting like the positive stuff, or the stuff that's good for them. And, we have to provide the big picture, not half of the picture, not a quarter of the picture. We have to provide the whole picture. And for the public, that's where journalism is still necessary and valuable.
I have a quick question right here.
Oh.
You survived the Trump
I'm a
administration.
survivor, yes.
When so many kind of pointed to that time as causing burnout, or decided to leave the business in one way or another. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how the pace of the job has changed since then, if it has, and have expectations changed from managers who, as well as reporters, got caught up in that cycle that never seemed to rest?
It's a great question. The pace, I would say, is pretty much the same. And again, I will point to Kayla here. The Biden White House has us going all the time. it was the same thing with Trump. We were just constantly going. Stuff was happening left, right. I used to go home at night during the Trump administration and turn on Anderson Cooper, which came on at 8, just to find out what story was breaking at 8, because it seemed like there was just something every hour, and something broke at 5, and then what broke at 6 topped what broke at 5, and it was just this sort of cascade of things. But the way that I see the differences between those two administrations, I think a lot of the pace and the busyness of the Trump administration was more born out of just the chaos that existed in that White House and with that president, and his use of Twitter to fire people and make pronouncements, and all the name calling and stuff that he did on Twitter. A lot of the people that worked for him also had never worked in government before. So remember what I said a moment ago about people being recycled. A lot of the people that went to work for Trump were not recycled. They had never worked in government before. So they were coming in kind of not knowing how the White House worked, how government worked, how all these different things worked. And some of that fed into the chaos, I think. In the case of Joe Biden, I think it's different, because I think here you have, and I don't want to take anything away from the Trump administration, because he did do some things, right? There was, the tax cuts and the Abraham Accords. He did some things in foreign policy. He did some things domestically. So he's got accomplishments to speak of, but I think what most people will remember from that time was just the chaos. I think with the Biden administration, it's busy because here you have somebody who is a creature of Washington, somebody who was in the Senate for a long time, knows about legislating, knows about relationships, and is trying to, in his mind, get as much done as he can. You often hear him make this joke about Trump and how under Trump every week was infrastructure week and nothing ever got done, because every time Trump declared it was infrastructure week, something came along or he said something that just totally overshadowed the theme of the week. And now Biden came in, he got an infrastructure bill and is now running around the country talking about all the money that's going to different states and cities to rebuild bridges and roads and blah, blah, blah. So I think that is a difference in how those two administrations functioned. But I think we're still as busy, or maybe even more busy in some instances than we were under Biden. One thing that didn't exist under Trump, weekends. Weekends are a lot different now. So when Trump was going out of town for the weekend, we, the reporter, whoever was going in the pool that weekend, we just got on the plane and we flew to Florida. Today is Friday. The president is going to Wilmington, Delaware for the weekend. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 reporters just to get him there. So there's the pool at the White House that will stay to watch the helicopter take off, if the weather allows him to. If he can't take the helicopter, there's a 3rd reporter in another pool that might have to take the bus to go to Wilmington to be there before he gets on the plane, which takes another reporter on the plane to get him to Wilmington. And so every weekend is a big kind of logistical challenge for a lot of us, because it just takes up so much manpower to get one man to Delaware. But those are some of the differences that I see in those administrations, just from having been around, chaotic versus just the business of legislating and trying to do stuff.
I think we have time for just one more.
You were talking about this before, I guess, from the opinion question, but what about when you go home or you meet a friend back from, childhood or something like that, and they are in their own media silo, either for one side or the other, and they start talking about, whatever narrative they have bought into, and you who are in the room in the White House and certainly know the facts than most people in the United States. How do you hold back, or do you say it's not really like that, how do you manage that?
Well, thankfully, the childhood friends that I have are not in their own little media silos. But if they were, I would just tell them, look, these are the facts, I'm in the room, this is the truth, believe me, I'm there, that kind of stuff, and try to reason with them to get them to see what the facts are versus whatever they're picking up in their little echo chamber.
How do you try not to be too friendly with the White House officials? Because you do want to be on their good side, because in case they want to leak something to you or just be friendly with you. But you also know that as a journalist, you have to stay a little bit removed. But the AP is also not an adversarial kind of like outlet as well. So how do you kind of like manage
Yeah,
that?
you do have to maintain a certain professional distance from the people you cover. And it's okay to take them out for coffee, right? Because you want to get to know them a little bit and, let them know you well enough to realize that you're a good person, you're a good reporter, maybe I can trust you. And, the third or fourth time you go out for coffee, they'll whisper something in your ear. But, I don't get invited to a lot of parties or things like that at people's homes. So that's one way to maintain that distance, just by, well, not by not being invited, but not going. And it's always a challenge in a place like Washington. But I mean, you can still be a person and personable to these people that you cover, and just not be their friends. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right or if that makes any sense at all, but you can ask about family, children, where'd you go on vacation? How was your vacation if they went on vacation? You can be a person without being too close to them, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I don't know if that makes any sense to you or not, but those are kind of some of the things that I try to do. I wouldn't go on vacation with someone I cover, or you'd be within your right to go to dinner with them because it's a quasi-professional business type of thing. But there are lines to be drawn, and certainly you don't accept gifts or sports tickets or things like that. So you just have to. And if there's any doubt, talk to your editor or talk to another colleague and say, hey, so-and-so invited me to do this, and what do you think? Should I do this? And get some outside input if you have any doubt about the invitation or offer that you're getting.
Well, I hate to shut this down, but two of Darlene's colleagues are out in the green room, so to speak, and you'll be able to pummel them in a few minutes. But I do want to thank Darlene for the time and the thoughtfulness and such a great session. But thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.